Welcome back to another video. Today we are going to look at trigonometry. Trigonometry actually has three words hidden inside of it. That first word being tri. That means three, just like a tricycle. Gon means sides. So a polygon means many sides. And here we have three sides. So this gon means side, and this ometry is a form of measurement. So there's actually three words hidden in here. Three, so we're going to be looking at triangles. So trigonometry is all about right angle triangles. It is about the sides of the triangles, and we are going to measure and calculate what these three sides are. Let's have a look at a larger right angle triangle. Here is a much larger triangle. This symbol might be new. This symbol here is called theta. Theta. And that's the symbol that we use in mathematics for the angle. When we are looking at our triangle, we have three sides. This long side here is called the hypotenuse. This hypotenuse is the longest side. It is the diagonal side. You might be familiar with hypotenuse for when we did Pythagoras. This side down here and this side up here in Pythagoras' theorem is known as the short side. But when we are dealing with trigonometry and this angle here, we need to be very specific about which side we are using, because we are no longer going to be adding two numbers together. This side over here, what's a name we could call this? Well, this side here is on the opposite side of the angle. So that's the word that we use to describe this side. So this is the opposite. Now, this side down here, well, this is next to my angle. This side down here is next to. And we have a different word for that in English, a more formal word, and that is called the adjacent. This is called the adjacent. So we have two sides. Now these sides depend on where the angle is. The side that is opposite the angle is called the opposite, and the side next to the angle is called the adjacent. And this side up here is always the hypotenuse. Always the hypotenuse. Now, there's another defining feature on a right angle triangle that you should always look for, and this will help you find the hypotenuse. Down here, we have a right angle. Our two short sides, the opposite and the adjacent, are always next to this right angle, and the hypotenuse is always on the other side of our right angle. Now that we know the sides of a triangle, we're going to use some ratios to have a look at the sides of each triangle. When we are comparing things, we normally compare two things and how they relate to each other. Our triangle, it doesn't have two sides, it has three sides. So we have to come up with three different comparisons to compare the sides. Our first way of comparing two sides is called sine. Sine compares the opposite and the hypotenuse. The sine is going to be comparing the opposite side and the hypotenuse, because the opposite is always opposite the angle. And here I have another triangle that's upside down, and the side that's opposite our angle is this one down here. So this would be our opposite, and this would be our hypotenuse. Now, what sine does is it compares these two sides. Sine has a formula. Sine theta is equal to the opposite over the hypotenuse. Now, what this does is this sine theta is comparing the opposite side and the hypotenuse side. Now, sine theta, this is a number that is in your calculator. If you have an angle, you put that angle in here, and your calculator will tell you the ratio of the two sides. If this is the opposite and this is the hypotenuse, and we'll just say that the hypotenuse has a length of 8. And I put sine something into a calculator, and it tells me that the answer is 0.5. So what must my opposite be in order for this fraction to be a half? Is 0.5. So if the opposite has a length of 4, and we do 4 divided by 8, we will get a half. So what sine theta does is just a number that compares the ratio of the sides. If we know one of those sides, then we can find the other side because we know the ratio of how long those sides are going to be. Now we have 3 sides, so we're going to be comparing 2 sides 3 times. 2 different sides 3 times. So we have the hypotenuse and the opposite. So now let's compare the adjacent and the hypotenuse. Here we have 2 more triangles, and we're going to label these. So we're going to compare the hypotenuse, which is the long side, and we're going to compare the adjacent, which is next to. So this would be our adjacent. And on this triangle down here, you can see that this is the hypotenuse, and this up here is the adjacent. Now, we are going to look at what is called cos. This actually stands for the cosine. Now, I see something a little poetic about sine, cos, and tan because we're using triangles, we're using 3 sides, so formula having 3 letters is quite nice. So cos compares the adjacent and the hypotenuse. So let's write a formula for that. So cos theta compares the adjacent and the hypotenuse. So cos or cosine will compare these two numbers, and in your calculator, just like with sine, if you put in an angle, like cos 30 degrees, your calculator will tell you what the ratio is. And just like before, we can then mathematically or logically think what the other side is going to be. Now, we've compared these two sides, and we've compared these two sides. So we've got one more comparison to do. Now we need to compare these two sides. And we are going to use what is called tan. Tan also stands for the tangent. Tangent compares the opposite and the adjacent. So we're going to write that. So tan compares the opposite and the adjacent. So what it does is it compares these two things here. Let's write the other side. So tan theta is equal to O over A. Now let's quickly label our triangles. So we have this side over here is the opposite, and this side here is the adjacent. This side here is the opposite, and this side up here is the adjacent. So if we were to put in a calculator, tan theta, and that equals 2, and we knew that the adjacent side was 4, then what number would have to go up on the top? Well, the number that would go up on the top would be 8, because 8 divided by 4 gives me 2. So the tan, sine, and the cos ratio is just a number, and then we can use this fraction and this number to try to figure out what side is what. This is part 1 of trigonometry. Now in part 2, we'll do some examples. So see you in the next video.